Happy Tuesday, everybody. It is June 9th, 2020, and it's a great week. It is, because today we're talking about all things trail cams with Brad Sisson from New York. All right. Today is a special one. I say that every week, I think, but it is a special one. It's a really cool one. It's a geek one. I love it. I love when I can geek out and stuff like this. Today is all about trail cams. So Brad Sisson, he reached out to me and said, hey, I've been using cameras for a long time and I've killed great bucks in New York because of the information I get from cameras. And I'm like, okay, light bulb moment, need to have this guy on. Little did I know, when we get into this conversation, he tells me that he's been running cameras, trail cams, since 1999. I don't know of anybody that's been running them that long. So I immediately get geeked out, and he tells me that he hunts little woodlots, little 5-acre, 10-acre, 20-acre woodlots in New York, a lot like what I'm hunting and a lot of other guys are hunting around here. So this is definitely relatable, and we get into a ton of information. Brad has studied cameras for a long time now, since 1999. He's used a ton of different cameras, cell cams, regular cameras, film cameras, what have it. He's been running them. He runs about 70 to 80 a year now. And we just dive into it. We get into a couple cool stories about him killing great bucks in New York because of the information given to him from these cameras. We talk about, why he struck when he did and when he went in there. And we talk about, the good and the bad of trail cams. But when you don't get the buck on trail cam, he talks about what he does from there. That's another viable piece of information when you're not getting the buck on camera that you want to get on camera. So that's pretty cool too. So this is a cool episode. I really appreciate Brad coming on and doing this. So before we get over to that interview though, I do want to say something. Yesterday was my dad's birthday. Everybody that knows him and sees him, tell him happy belated birthday. So I want to get that out there. I know he's listened to this, so appreciate that. And happy birthday, Dad. So now let's go over this interview with Brad and let's get this thing rolling. All right, welcome back to another episode of the Fall Podcast, and today we are diving in hardcore with trail cams and basically everything there is around trail cams. And on the other line, I've got Brad Sisson with me. Brad, how you doing, man?
Good. How are you, man?
Good. I'm glad you wanted. You kind of reached out to me a couple days ago and said, "Hey, I got some cool things about trail cams and some things that I do that have really helped me capitalize just from trail cams over the past couple years." And then you and I kind of exchanging texts there, and I'm like, "Yeah, we need to get you on." So, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks, I appreciate it. I'm looking forward to it. I listened to your guest appearance on Working Class Bow Hunter and that podcast, and you were telling your story about that 1 acre spot in the field, and it kind of triggered a thought for me because we've got a very similar property in a scenario like that where we use trail cameras actually to get a couple mature bucks over the past few years out of there. And so that's why I thought I'd reach out to you and see if we could maybe hook up for a conversation or two.
For sure, man. I agree, and thank you for doing that. Before we get too far, kind of explain who you are and where you're from and maybe what you do for a living.
Sure. So I'm Brad Sisson. From a geographic perspective, I'm in New York, and I know when a lot of people hear New York, they think New York City, but I'm actually on the far western end of the Finger Lake section of New York, just south of Rochester. I basically make a living, in a Fortune 1000 company, but my passion is, obviously chasing mature whitetails. And so for the past 4 or 5 years now, I've run a company called Pursuit Outdoors that just specializes on trail camera sales and support for outfitters, other hunting companies, and land management consultants. And it's been really fruitful for me. And in terms of trail camera experience, I got my first trail camera back in 1999. So if that kind of gives you any indication, that was when cameras were still film based, and you'd get 24 pictures and you'd run to Walmart and wait there for the hour processing, and then, hope that you had, a deer on there, let alone a buck. And, obviously they've come a long way since then, but I kind of cut my teeth very early on in trail cams. And, I started to realize that they can be a huge tool for me personally.
Yeah.
Not just to go after mature whitetails, but, as my career has grown, as I've had kids and, getting time to get out there before the season and actually do glassing and sort of on the boot scouting, trail cameras became a bigger part of my game to be able to go after deer during the hunting season. So I've definitely come to appreciate the value they offer.
Very cool. Yeah, you talk about the very first camera you had, 1999. That's a long time ago. That you might have just dated yourself there.
Yeah. It was kind of funny too, because I remember when I got it, all of the other hunters that I kind of grew up around, when I walked out with it, they looked at it and they were just like, it was as if they had seen like, the best tool ever, but they couldn't understand the fact that when something walks by it literally takes the picture. And, now you've got trail cameras that'll send pictures to your phone within seconds.
Yep, definitely. And that's kind of how I started too. My first camera, I've only been running cameras for about 11 years now, but my first camera was given to me, and it was the same thing. It was a film camera. It was like a hand-me-down from one of my dad's friends, and he's like, here, just play around with this, and did the film thing and figured out the first time I took the film to, Walmart or something to get the pictures off it, there was a branch in front of it for 2 days and like never got a picture of a deer. So, you live and you learn, and I learned from my mistakes. But yeah, you and I are talking a little bit off record, and, for me, just kind of to get it out there, like within the last 2 or 3 years, I've really changed the way I've used cameras. And, you mentioned the 1 acre, and all my listeners are like, he's talking about the 1 acre again. I guarantee it, because I talk about it a lot, but it's my little piece of heaven. I love it, and but this farm, like I said, it's an 80-acre farm with only 1 acre of timber on it. So there's some wooded fence rows. There's cameras that I put in this, in the 1 acre that I don't touch all year. I won't touch it until end of season. Or if I get back there to hunt, then I'll grab it. And I don't hunt it a lot. So, but summer months, doesn't matter, crop rotation does not matter. There's a group of 4 trees. I think they're like dogwood trees in the middle of 2 big ag fields, and there's only 4 of them, nothing else around them. And I put a camera there, and literally every buck in the section walks by it in the summer. So that is my inventory camera. And it's the reason why, it hit me like 2 years ago. I'm like, man, I should really try to just put a camera on there. And the reason why I wanted to is because it was the farthest away from the 1 acre I could get without, getting in there all the time and checking. I can go check this camera anytime I want, and I don't screw anything up. So that was my whole game plan going forward. But this 1 acre farm has really made me grow as a trail cam guy too, because like you said, they've helped you out a lot. I feel like they can help you a lot, but they also can really be stressful at times too. So I have a love-hate.
For sure. You know what? It's funny you say that. So, with your 1 acre piece, we have a 40-acre section that we have a lease on here, and it is literally a square, and there is a 5.5-acre woodlot with 2 hedgerows coming off of it.
Yep.
And the rest of it is either in corn or beans in some form of rotation. And the nearest woodlot from that is at least 1,000 yards away in any direction, right? So it's pretty isolated. And using cameras over the past few years in that spot, we started to really understand how they were using that little piece of cover, essentially. And over the past 3 seasons, we've pulled 2 deer out of there over 130 inches.
Wow.
So, and I can tell you exclusively because the way it lays out, they do corn in the front section, and you can't glass it. Like, you just can't get in there, and you can't get close enough to actually scout it without blowing out the woods, essentially, because it's so small. And so we've really resourced to using cameras to get us that intel, and it's worked out really well. My hunting partner shot an 11 point this year on November 2nd. It was the first time we went into that woodlot, but we knew it was the right time to go in, and we knew we were going to kill this deer, and this was the deer we were going after, and we were able to get it. And in 2017, I shot a 136 inch 9-point out of there. Same stand, same scenario. The buck came from the same bed, but the trail cameras were what was the tool that I used to get that information.
Okay, so let's start there. And we might have to backtrack. Since we're on the topic, I want to pick your brain on how these cameras, essentially killed these deer for you. Now, were they cell cams or were they just normal trail cams?
They were both. So back in 17, it was a regular camera. And then this past year, we set a cell camera in what would be the northeast corner, which is where we were seeing a lot of, activity going in and out of the woodlot. And so we set up a cell camera on that corner, and that cell camera was giving us a lot of that data.
Okay, so it's a 5 acre set of timber, right, with a couple hedgerows on it. So What is your guys' game plan? When you get into this, do you just strike once these cameras are starting to show bucks in daylight, or is it like, I got a good wind, I know I can slip in there, I'm going to see what happens?
Yeah, so it's really, we do pay attention to the wind. This particular spot doesn't have a lot of elevation change. At most, you're probably talking maybe 18 to 24 inches from one end of the property to the other. It's not a huge elevation change. So thermals aren't always playing a huge role unless it's an impact because of the woods or the crops themselves, right? So we do pay attention to the wind, and we will walk and basically go the circumference around the property if we know that we can get into the stand without being detected or blowing out the property as a whole. So we will be very careful about how we go in and out of the property. However, the camera data will, generally speaking, start to tell us ahead of time, especially on the cell cameras, when that activity is picking up. In October, our season starts October 1 in New York. In October, generally speaking, we'll start to see some daylight activity by those bucks, and we don't always go in right away, right? So we might see this, this buck we actually had on camera, I want to say 4 times in daylight the last week of October, but it was still too early to go in there because the buck was still right on the edge of shooting light. It's basically too close to call kind of thing. Right?
Yep. So were you feeling that these bucks were living in this 5 acres?
Yeah, so without a doubt, both of these bucks were shot out of the same tree stand, and they were using the same bedding area within that small timber section. It doesn't have a lot of low-level brush, and there's only a small section in the southeast corner. It's probably, I would say, maybe a 20 by 20 yard area that's got just enough daylight reaching the ground where some of the brush and some of the multiflora has grown up, and the bucks bed in there. And they'll actually, a lot of times, because our predominant wind is either west or southwest, they will oftentimes work their way up and out through the northeast corner. And so both times we actually walked in either on the west side and then along the north border and dropped in, or we went along the east side on the other side of the hedgerow and snuck in that way.
Okay. Now, so are you a big proponent on historical data then? Were these bucks, and if so, were these bucks, did you have them the previous year, and were they doing kind of the same thing?
Yeah, it's actually funny. So cameras were showing for the buck that I shot in 2017, the 9-point. 2 years prior to that, my hunting buddy and I actually jumped that deer out of its bed when we were going to check a trail camera. And it was in an area, because we had just acquired the access to the property, it was in an area that we didn't really have a good understanding of at the time. So when we bumped it out, we watched kind of its escape route and learned a little bit there, right? So trail cameras can do a lot, but they can't do everything. And so kind of observing where the escape routes were, we actually moved our trail camera to that spot, and that spot started to give us reliable information because the buck was entering and exiting that woodlot most often through that corner. So we did, start to be able to track that deer the following year by doing the same thing. Unfortunately, he broke off pretty much everything beyond his brow tine on one side, and we essentially let him be for a full year before we went after him that third season. and we went right in, and we were able to get him on the second sit of that property.
Wow, that's cool. So, I mean, you monitored that buck through cameras for basically 3 years before you kind of jumped in on him, right?
Yep. Yeah, we honestly would have went after him the 1 year when he broke his beam, but it was just, obviously, it was bad luck, whether he was fighting with another buck or whatever, but he broke it off pretty early on in the season, and it was pretty much a buck that we were going to agree to pass on for the next year.
Yep. So with this 5 acres, is it something you just stay the heck out of then until that camera, because you're saying, it was showing first, he's, right at last light. So, it's going to be like closing time, it might be pretty iffy to get in there and get him. When you get those pictures like that, let's say, how many times does he have to do that to where you're like, okay, is it just once where he's like shows up last light and then it's like, he's getting closer and then you wait, or do you strike?
Yeah, so I think that answer changes a little bit based on what time of the year it is, right? So in October, the deer are starting to, those mature bucks are starting to push their safety boundaries when they're getting up in the evenings, and they're starting to maybe explore a little bit, hit scrapes, do some posturing, some staging, starting to maybe scent check some of the doe estrus groups and see what's happening, because obviously things ramp up as we get into November. But in October, I generally like to see this happen 2 to 3 times before we make the move. You always want to strike while the iron's hot, but what I've found is 1 time doesn't make a pattern, and sometimes 2 doesn't make a pattern. But you get it a 3rd time, you've got the information to make the move and be really confident that you're going to encounter that deer. What did help us in that scenario is that property, again, it's 40 acres, but only 5.5 acres of timber on one little section. We had cameras on pretty much all the corners, and then on a couple boundaries of the timberline, right? And so we were only picking that deer up on that one camera. So what's amazing is, that timber is basically like a square itself. And I had 8 cameras on it, and I was only picking that buck up on 1 camera, entering and exiting that woodlot.
Okay, so you had a really good beat on like his entry and exit. What do you think so you knew he was bedding in there then?
Yep.
So how many cameras did you have on 5 acres?
So I had 8.
8?
So I had I had 1 on the north side. I had 1, 2, 3, 4 on the left side, so on the west side, 1 on the south side, and then the rest were all on the east side. And only 2 of them were cell cameras. So I had 1 on the west side and then 1 on the northeast corner, which is the one where he was moving in and out of.
Okay, and so then to paint a better picture, is this 5 acres, is it all fields around it?
Yeah, so it's the nearest huntable timber is about 1,000 yards away in any direction. So it's pretty much an island.
Yep.
And surrounding it is ag, whether it's beans, corn, alfalfa. And the only thing running into that little 5 acre section is just basically a hedgerow that runs, east to west and north to south on the border of the property.
Gotcha. And now, do you have any food plots or anything on this in the timber at all?
No, nothing in the timber. So in fact, the real challenging part of that particular property is outside of that small 20 by 20 section where that buck bed is, it's completely open. So, there's a high browse line is the way I would refer to it, but it's not even really due to the deer. It's because the trees are so mature that they've shaded out all the undergrowth and the vegetation in the woodlot. So if you enter pretty much from any corner, you run the risk of blowing deer out because you can see so far into that woodlot. Now, once you get leaves down, you can see all the way across that woodlot.
So, okay, that's what I was getting to right here, because this is interesting to me. Now, when you're going in to hunt this, you figure, let's go back to the night that you killed this buck. Was it an evening that you killed the buck?
So I killed that buck on the evening of November. It was November 8th.
Okay, so when you went in, was he in the timber, but you didn't really know it? When you went
So
in
I
to
didn't
sit?
know. Yeah, I didn't know that he was in there, other than I knew that he was using that particular buck bed area. And so when we went in, the farm was actually combining the corn.
Okay, so there was corn
And
surrounding it then.
yeah, there was corn all around on the south, the west, and the east side. The north side was essentially a green field that was planted in cover crop.
Okay, so when you went in that night, or when you go in no matter what, are you worried about blowing deer, or is it just one of those things like, I know this is a small piece of timber, you know, I'm just going to hope for the best? Or, I mean, how deep are you getting in as well?
Yeah, so the stand, this particular stand that we killed both these bucks out of, it's on the northeast corner, and it is, I would say, 5 yards in the timber line, both going north and on the east side. So, I'm not stepping into the woods, into that woodlot, probably more than 10 feet, 15 feet at most.
Okay, and you don't have any stands inside the woodlot at all?
We do. We do. We've got 5 stands in that woodlot. So, I mean, you can do the math there. It's a stand an acre, right?
Yep.
But that stand is the one that we primarily hunt. There is a small pond that borders the property on the north side. And so we do have one stand there early on in the season where deer will come up and basically water at this little pond. I mean, the pond can't be more than probably 40 by 20 feet. So it's not very big at all, but it's a watering hole. And so the deer will use it early. The other stands are more or less, I hate to say it, but they're probably gun stands, right? So
Yep.
more for when the cover's down and you can shoot out into the fields because you can cover ground that way.
For sure. Now, so you're in your stand that you killed him on is in the northeast, basically corner. Where
Yep.
is the buck bed from you? Is it on the very south end of the property?
Yeah, so it's in this woodlot. So the woodlot is on the north side of the property. So the property itself is literally a square. It's almost exactly the same height east and west as it is north and south. And the woodlot is literally on the northern property line, right? So at that point, that buck bed would be in the southeast corner, but not right in it. I would say you're probably going in about 30 yards and probably up about 30 yards. And so it's just the one spot where there's enough daylight in that little woodlot for that vegetation to grow. And what's funny is you can't see that buck bed from the stand, which is good because obviously if we could see it, he could see us going to that stand.
Right.
But as soon as that deer gets up, it's within visibility. Like you can see it. So I actually watched that deer get up out of its bed.
Oh, really?
See it I couldn't see it when I got in the stand, but as soon as he stood up, I saw him. So it's definitely one of those ones where the trail cameras really helped me narrow down, because in 5.5 acres, it's an all or nothing proposition.
For sure.
You screw up once, you're blowing out that whole woodlot, right?
Especially on a deer that in a New York or like a Michigan or PA, you get a mature buck in that. And if he sees you and smell you or you spook him, I mean, that could be your last shot. That he might be gone. He might be 2 counties over. So
sure.
that's it is. And that's, as you're explaining this, I'm thinking in my head, are you hunting in Michigan? Because I know a spot just like this, and I'm that's why I'm so invested now. Not that I wasn't before, but this small acre stuff really gets me going. I love it because it's just a different challenge. I grew up as a big woods hunter. We have a family farm that's 215 acres, all timber, but 60 acres of it is field, but it's surrounded by a mile section basically of timber. So it's huge. In this, this small acre stuff, I really, really geek off of it. But so to go into that night, did you get a cell camera picture of this deer within that day or the day before? And you were like, okay, yep, I'm going in.
Yeah, so that deer back in 2017, we weren't using cell cameras at that time. We just had regular cameras in that woodlot because it was still pretty early on for us learning that property, and we're trying to figure out how to best hunt it over the years. But what we had done is we went in, checked the cameras, right? I mean, you have to roll the dice at some point during the season to go in and check. We went in, we hunted the northern property line. So my buddy and I sat those two stands, and we had cameras pretty much right where those stands were, and we were able to check them. And lo and behold, we were finding out that buck was going in and out of that northeast corner spot. And so what it told us, we hung it out there. We stayed for the evening hunt. We had the SD cards with us. We didn't check it in the stand. But when we got home, we realized, like, wow, that buck was here just this morning. Like, we literally just missed him by like 3 hours. And so what we ended up doing is we had to wait for the right wind. We turned around and went right back in there as soon as the wind was right. And we knew that the farm was going to be combining. So we took a gamble, and we actually went in real early, got situated. Combines came in, and they started cutting the corn down, and they were cutting the corn down in the southwest corner of the property, right? So I'm sitting there thinking, like, you can't make this any better, because that deer is, if he's in here, he's not going to go toward the combines, right? He literally got up and walked straight up to the northeast corner to leave. And what really got us to sit there again was those trail camera pictures.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah, the buck that we shot in November, that my buddy shot out of that same stand, it was November 2nd, and it was the start of our rutcation. So we had the cell camera placed in that same spot because we realized that this buck bed was going to backfill with new deer, and it did. And so the last week in October, we started getting pictures of this deer that we had infrequently seen over the summer that we knew was 4.5, because we had pictures of him as a 3.5-year-old, and we had jumped him previously as well during the prior hunting season and passed on him. So we started getting these pictures the last week in October, and he was creeping further and further ahead of sunset. So
okay.
I want to say it was like around October 20th, we got a picture of him right kind of at legal shooting time. And then about 3 days later, he showed up again, this time about 15 minutes early. And unfortunately, we couldn't get off. But the next day, we had pictures of him literally bedded right where the trail camera was in the middle of the day at 1 o'clock.
Wow.
Yeah. So we've got pictures of this deer bedded. So we're like, man, we think we may have missed our shot here, because he was in this woodlot during daylight, and we may have kind of like waited too long. But the next day he showed up on November 1. He was running through the woods. We got a couple pictures of him on the cell cam. And so we made the decision to actually push this, because it's typically an afternoon spot, because it's so open, and it's hard to get into. You walking across any bare ground during nighttime, it's a recipe for failure, because those deer are out feeding, so they bolt. But we actually walked all the way around to the north property line and dropped into 2 stands. So both my buddy and I were in that woodlot, and that deer cut across a 1,000-yard open wide green field and ran right to my buddy in the tree stand. He watched that deer from 1,000 yards away, I think.
Holy cow.
Like I literally had text messages from him saying, I see the buck. He's like so far away, and he's just texting me saying that he's run into him, because he's, it's a mature buck, and he's basically trying to go back to his bed, but he got caught in daylight. He wasn't back to his bed before the sun rose. And that deer literally came off of this wide open green field and came right in for a 20-yard shot. My buddy had that deer down within 15 minutes of legal shooting light.
Wow. That was in the morning then.
Yeah, it was in the morning.
So when you guys entered those stands, you said you went to the north fence row, but did you go through a wide open field, or was it a cornfield?
So it was actually a cornfield on the northwest side, and then it gives way to a green cover crop field. And that cover crop field is as wide open as you can get. Like, you couldn't make a rifle shot to the other timber across the other side of the field. It's that far away. And that deer came from that woodlot coming to bed in that 5-acre patch.
Okay.
So what we did is we actually walked in, in between the hedgerow that runs east and west, leading into that woodlot in the corn. And then we literally walk that edge of the woods, and the stands are, 5 yards in the timber.
Yep.
And so we use that cover, and we cross the little pond to get to one of the stands. And then my buddy was in the northeast side.
That's crazy. So you guys went into those stands that morning because you got a picture of that buck bedded the day before, right?
Yep.
So,
Yep.
I mean, that was totally just, he's here in daylight, midday. We know he's bedding here because it's, he's, to me, if I get a picture like that deer, that's his home, that he calls home. In the middle of the day, bedded like that.
Yeah, it was really cool. And, what helped kind of cement that decision, though, wasn't even just him. So what the cell camera was showing was increased activity within that specific corner. And what I would say, and I can't tell you whether it was, an early estrus doe or anything like that, but what was very clear was that there were multiple bucks, year and a half, 2.5-year-olds and him in there on that camera multiple times from, during the daylight the day before, overnight, even to that morning where we decided to make that walk in. So we knew that activity had picked up, and we still don't know whether it was a hot doe or what, because we never had a chance to sit there long enough because the deer was dead.
Right.
But there was obviously an uptick in activity, and that's one of the triggers that I do look for on cell cameras on when to make the move, because cell cameras, if you place them during the phases of the rut in known doe group areas or places where bucks will scent check or visibly check out those doe groups, you will see a noticeable increase in activity, and that's your trigger to go in immediately during the rut to go after those deer.
Yep, for sure. I couldn't agree more. Now let's throw a scenario out here. So you got 5 acres. Let's say you're not using cell cams. So let's say you have 8 cameras in this, around or in this timber. How are you checking these cameras, the ones in the timber that you have to kind of walk through the timber to get to? When are you doing it? How are you doing it? Like, what's your game plan there? Because, 5 acres, we had talked, like, especially with it being a doe group area and possibly a buck bedding area, like, how do you do it now?
Yeah, so a lot of it's going to depend on, what kind of crops are in there, what kind of rotations going on, because you can use the corn to your advantage in terms of being able to access the wood line. So if you've got corn surrounding the property, you can get in there. You just have to have a hunting mindset. You can't walk in, being upwind of the wood lot and let your scent just drag across as you're walking in. But if you've got corn and you've got cameras on the edges, you can access them if you be smart about it. I know a lot of people are really big fans of checking cameras when it's raining or when it's wet, right? Because they believe that it disperses or cleans up scent. And it's not. Number one, I think there's some biology myth there, because scent tends to disperse a little bit more, but it's more easily noticed during misty days, right? Like the scent travels through the molecules in the air a little bit easier during that time. But the other piece of it too is you really put yourself in bad shape, because checking cameras in the rain is one of the easiest ways to get your cameras killed.
Yeah.
Because water intrusion is the easiest way for most cameras to die out, because they don't have coated internals. So they end up rusting and getting corrosion on the boards and the electronics of it. And so I'm much more of a fan of checking cameras when it's not raining, because of the fact that when it is, you can't keep that camera dry. When you have to open the door and pull the SD card, you're going to get moisture in there, and every drop is just shortening the lifespan of that camera.
For sure. Yeah, that's a good point. I'm kind of going back to how you said, these 2 bucks that you guys killed are bucks. Those are kills from trail cams. Could you agree with that? Like 100% we killed those bucks because of trail cams?
Yeah, I definitely think, like, if we didn't have cameras and the intel that we were using, we probably wouldn't have been able to kill them as efficiently as we did, right? I mean, between those two bucks, there were 3 hunts involved, and that's that's pretty good ratios there.
For sure.
We did have encounters with both of those bucks the year prior, jumping them out of that same spot. And in fact, the one that was killed this past November, we could have shot during gun season during basically a 2-man push, me pushing to my buddy essentially on the other end of the woodlot. We pushed them out, but we opted to give them one more year, and obviously it worked out well for us. So we may have gotten one of them. We may have got both. I don't know. But what I can tell you is that the trail cams made the difference because we were extremely efficient. We knew going in both times that we had a high degree of confidence that we'd at least encounter those deer. And, that kind of puts the odds in your favor a little bit.
Definitely. I actually did that on one buck here in Michigan back in 2016. He was a 118-inch 8-pointer. I watched him all summer on camera on a certain part of the farm where we get inventory from, and it just so happened he was daylight. I mean, religiously all through September. I've never really had a buck through September when the velvet comes off that their pattern stays the same, like a good buck, And then my plan was to stay out of there for 2 weeks leading up to season, and I was going to go in first thing. I had a stand right there. I was going to go first thing October 1st morning, climb in there early. I figured I was right next to where he was bedding and try it. Well, it was raining. I went hunting anyway, didn't see a deer. And like you just said about the rain, check him in the rain. The rain had about midday stopped, and I'm like, you know what? I'm going to go check that camera. I had another camera up on the front end of the property. And, these two cameras are really far apart. When I say really far, it's probably 1,000 yards or more. I mean, it's a good distance between them. Mm-hmm. I had never had this deer from, where I sat that morning all summer. I've never had him on this camera up front. And it was just like, it's on my way out of the property. I was just going to, pull up, get out, run in, check it, and get out of there. When I did that, I realized that buck for 4 days in a row leading up to when I checked it was daylight every night doing the same thing. And I'm like, okay. So I turned around, went back to my deer camp our cabin, got my stuff ready, had a good wind, went and climbed in, killed him at 18 yards that night, did the same thing. And when that happened, it was almost like, I just found lightning in a bottle. And then I tried to do it again, and I don't know, for one thing or another, it's probably me checking the camera too much or something. I think I just caught the right scenario at the right time, and it happened. Like for you guys to go back-to-back years on bucks like that from cameras, I mean, that's saying something, that you're doing your shit right.
Yeah, it's, I've been using cameras long enough to know that, you can do a lot of damage, right? So over checking cameras, putting them in places that you just know are going to be too intrusive to really be able to give you data that's reliable over time. And, this year, the 2019 season was pretty tough for me personally, because that buck that my buddy shot on November 2nd, because it was the second good buck that we had pulled out of that property, we elected to basically hand drag that deer out. So we could access that property through the northern farm that bordered it. We had permission to go and get it, but that farm and that family are big time hunters. I mean, just, New York, everybody hunts if you're not in the cities, right?
Yep.
And so we had that deer dead, and my buddy and I were having this conversation, and we're like, man, if we go tell him we shot another deer, because back in 2017, I used my truck to go get that deer, and he saw it, and he's like, wow,
Right.
So we didn't want to tip our hand again. And so we're like, well, man, let's just drag this deer out. So I was like, I wasn't super excited at this prospect because, I kind of dated myself a little bit earlier. My hunting partner is 10 years younger than me. So he's got a little bit more energy than I do. And this is, a 4.5-year-old corn and soybean fed buck. Like, it's not a light deer. And so we start dragging this thing out, and I immediately, we got about halfway, I literally blew my back out.
Oh man.
I literally ruptured a disc in my back dragging that buck out.
Oh.
And it was tough too, because it was so bad that I actually had to spend a few days in bed during rutcation because I literally couldn't even get out of the bed. It was horrible.
Wow.
So that was a tough start to our rutcation in our November and December part of the season. And thankfully, though, from that November 2nd, when my buddy killed that deer, the last Sunday of our regular gun season, I shot a real nice, almost 130-inch 9-point on a late season trail camera food plot setup. And then on the last day of our muzzleloader season, which in New York follows our regular gun season, my buddy shot a 134-inch, 21-inch wide 11-point. And we shot all of those using trail cameras this year. So not only did I hurt my back, but if I didn't have trail cameras, I probably would not have shot the buck that was a season saver for me, so to speak.
So how did you use the cameras then to get on these deer?
Yeah, so what's interesting is the buck that I shot, I used it with positive information. But the buck that my buddy shot, the muzzleloader buck, that's what I call negative information. And so trail cameras, when people think about trail cameras, they think, okay, if the deer's on camera, I now know this. But there is a tremendous amount of information when a deer doesn't show up on a camera, right? So now to track back to that 5-acre lot that we were talking about, I had 8 cameras ringing around that little 5-acre woodlot, and he was only showing up on one camera. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yep.
So those 7 cameras showed me and told me what I needed to know because he wasn't showing up on them. So, looking at the buck that I shot, it was the last day of our gun season. It was a morning hunt. About 10 days earlier, we started getting this buck to appear, and it was a buck that I didn't really notice right away. I run a lot of trail cameras, so for the most part, bucks really aren't a surprise for me when they show up unless they're passing through during the rut. But this buck showed up, and he started to stick around. And so we started getting him on camera in the evenings after daylight. But as the season wore on, hunting pressure in New York starts to drop a little bit. It gets cold, it gets snowy. The weekend warriors are going out for the first hour and the last hour, and that's it. And this particular buck was heading to a food source in the overnight hours. So I was picking him up on a Browning cell camera, moving what would be west to east, going to a destination food source. It was a cut ag field that the deer were flocking to. And I was picking him up on that same camera coming back in the morning. And he did that 3 times. And unfortunately, with my job, my hunting season, I have to put all of my effort in, for the most part, in October and November. Once December hits, I'm probably only out in the woods, maybe like 3 or 4 times tops. And every time that he was showing up, I had to be in the office. And thankfully, that Sunday was the final day of the season. I was like, all right, I told my wife, I said, I am going out there in the morning. I'm going to be back by 9, either with a deer or without a deer, because he's going to either be there right at first light, or he's not going to be there at all, because I'll have missed them. Right. And that deer, when I was in the office the day before, I'm literally in the office working, and my cell camera goes off, and it's this deer about 10 minutes after legal shooting time, walking right by the camera where I have one of my stands. And I showed my buddy, who's one of my managers at work, and I'm like, I'm going to go kill this deer tomorrow. Kind of half joking, right? Because at that point I had gone through the whole season, hadn't been able to get out as much because of my back issues, but I was really determined to at least make one real strong attempt at it. And, that cell camera had told me if I go out there, I got to go out there about an hour before I normally do at that time of the year. And so I went out there. My buddy, he was wore out. He had already gotten his buck and bow. He opted to sleep in, and so I was solo on this one. And I parked my truck, and because it's upstate New York where there's a lot of hunters, small acre property, I didn't have to go too far. Problem was though is that we had a frost over the snow overnight, and so the snow was like
really loud.
Yeah, it was that like potato chip sound, where it's like you take a step and you're just like, oh man. And of course, no wind whatsoever.
Yep.
Dead wind. So I was like, well, thankfully I got in there and I got up. It took me a lot longer to get to the stand. In fact, I got to the stand, much later than I wanted to. But I got up there and daylight was breaking, and I heard a deer coming off of this field, and I knew, I was like, this has got to be him. It has to be him. So I heard him before I could see him, and I'm spun around looking, and sure enough, he shows up. And by the time that deer had a bullet in him, was probably like 4 seconds. Like I wasn't gonna mess around with that one.
Definitely.
And ended up getting him within 20 yards. So like I could have shot him with a bow if I had to. But that cell camera really gave me the information I needed, because he became really reliable on a pattern.
Yep.
And I knew the general bedding area. I didn't know where his bed was, but I knew where the food source was. And overnight, what really got me amped up was I got a picture of him at 2:30 going to that destination food source. And when I got to the truck, I had no picture of him. So I was pretty
You knew he was out feeding more than likely.
You got it.
Yep.
You got it. And, he had done that 3 or 4 times over the course of the preceding 7 days. So I knew I had a pretty good odds. And, same thing. That was the only deer I saw that morning, but that was the only deer I needed to. So it worked out really well. What was interesting about my buddy's muzzleloader buck is we never got that deer on camera. We were hunting a part of the farm that was literally like, it's probably a 40-acre field, and the farm owns about 10 feet into the woodlots that surround the field. And so we're essentially hunting field. And on the far west side of this property, we were able to set up some stands on the edge and have some really good encounters during the bow season, and even going into gun season. Didn't pan out. However, one day, it was my last day of muzzleloader season. I couldn't get out anymore due to work. I'm walking out kind of in that twilight period where there's snow on the ground and you can still see really well, but it was after legal shooting hours. I'm walking back to the barn, and I'm probably 300 or 400 yards away, and I see a buck. And it didn't look like a big one, but real quickly behind it, I saw a deer that, you could just tell by body size alone, because of that 2-year-old being there, like, this is a mature deer. I didn't know who it was, didn't see him, but we had cameras pretty much rung around the property except in that spot. And what that really told me is that deer was only using a very small part of our property in one very specific area of the farm. And so what I did is, after that encounter, I told my buddy who was able to get out, I said, hey, don't go to our stand. Go sit in the hedgerow and just look to the north, and that deer's going to come out. And, I'm sitting at work, and he's like, hey, I'm heading out. By the time I got to my house, that deer was dead.
Holy cow. So
and that was all because the trail cameras like pretty much narrowed it down to say, look,
because he wasn't on any of them.
You got it. Yeah.
So is it that cut and dry for you guys? So, because for me, I guess this is how, I'm the worst with decisions. I talk myself out of decisions all the time. And I always hem-haw about it, like, second guess yourself. But like, okay, let's say I have a couple cameras in an area or on a farm, and I don't get this deer here on any of these cameras. The first thing I'm thinking is, this deer is long gone or he's dead. So now, like, is it that cut and dry for you guys to be like, man, okay, he's not on the cameras, but then you physically saw them though, right?
Yeah.
So
And so it's interesting you say that, right? So a lot of people when they see an absence of deer on their camera, or not the deer they want to go after, they assume that deer is not using that property, and that oftentimes isn't true, because cameras only pick up a really small part of your property, right? And it can be as simple as having the camera facing the wrong direction on the tree. I mean, it boils down to being that simple. But where it becomes really useful, where you get a higher degree of confidence, is as you learn a property, if you're hunting it year after year, right? So like a lease, or you own, or you've got it on permission, you start to realize, where these deer and where these mature bucks generally use the property, and how they use it, and when they use it. And that really starts to inspire the confidence. And so, these properties, over those first few seasons, we were really learning how they were using it. And in this particular scenario, this late season deer, I mean, on this farm has, I want to say, it's probably 105 acres. And in total, there's about 17 acres of like hangable timber, if you will. And we've been hunting that property for a while, and we've got anywhere between 15 and 20 cameras on that property. And I never once got a picture of that deer. And it was interesting too, because I laid eyes on it, physically could see it was on the property. But knowing what I did about the cameras and how long we've been running them there, that it was really likely that this deer was only using a very small sliver part of this farm. And all he was doing was, he was on the northern side on the neighbor. He was using their property, but he was popping south to feed in the field. But he was only feeding in this little dip, that mature bucks like to hang out in, because it hides them visibly from the roads and from the houses and farms. And it's also a really good way for them to come out into the fields, because they can check thermals. But I laid eyes on them, and instantly I was like, this is where we got to be to kill this deer. And it was a phone call, hey, I'm done for the season. You need to get out there. And, he went out there, it was snowing, and that deer came out to feed like clockwork. And he had that deer dead within the first 30 minutes of going out there.
that's crazy, man. That's so cool. And I feel like, I don't know, you hear it from a lot of guys that are like, I run trail cams, but I hate, I hate them, but I love them. It's a love-hate for a lot of people. And I guess if it's one of those things, what I'm kind of taking from it is like, kind of have an open mind and take a step back when you get the information. Okay, instead of going immediately, oh, this deer's not here, got to move the camera, got to move the stand, that kind of stuff, whatever it might be, take a step back and then kind of look at the big picture. Now, for one thing I do want to ask you is, when you're setting up cameras, are you like strategically setting these things up to like eliminate? So let's say you have 10 cameras on a piece, and are you strategically setting them up to like eliminate, he's only on one camera, or he's on 3 of the 10? Like, are you setting those up in a way where you can kind of make it easier for yourself? Like, are you only honing in on, let's say you have like 100-acre patch of timber or 100-acre farm, are you only honing in on like 10, 15 acres at a time? Or is it more of like a bigger, does that make sense? You know what I mean? Are you honing in on like an area and just trying to eliminate from there?
Yeah, so it's an interesting concept. I mean, my buddy, he gets really frustrated with me, because I will spend a lot of time setting my cameras. And part of the reason, though, is over time, I think he's learned it, is that I'm setting them with the most amount of thought that I can. And it really hinges on, your particular situation, the property, the layout, the deer, the pressure, all that stuff are factors into where you would set your cameras. But generally speaking, if I have a property and I'm looking at it holistically, I'm not going to just kind of focus on a specific area. I'm going to spread these cameras out and use the terrain features to start out with, right? And then also the basic understanding of what deer behavior is like. So if I have a pinch point because of geography, I'm going to set a camera up there, and I'm going to learn how the deer are using that pinch point, when they use that pinch point, maybe try to get some guesses as to why they're using that pinch point, right? So, case in point, this same farm that my buddy killed a muzzleloader buck on the far east side, there's a creek that runs and winds south to north on that particular property. And in there's this little sliver of timber that pinches down, and the deer, if they're not going to cross the creek, they have to walk through this 10 by, I'd say probably 10-yard wide stretch of basically brush. And so what we did is we kind of mowed the opening to be able to allow a camera to actually effectively capture what's moving by. And we've had really good luck inventorying bucks on that property, because almost every single buck will go through that pinch point at one point or another in the season.
I gotcha. That makes sense, definitely. And especially because in New York, you guys can't bait, right?
No, so we can't use minerals or corn or anything like that.
Yep.
Which is, it can be frustrating at times, because if you're trying to inventory deer or trying to figure out what your standards or, what your age classes that you want to target reasonably are, being in Ohio or some of the other states where you can do that, if you've got 100-acre chunk of land, you put out 2 or 3 of those mineral sites, and you're more than likely going to capture the large majority of deer.
For sure.
On camera. Yep. In New York, you can't do that.
Yep, definitely. And that's kind of a lot of guys. Same way here in Michigan, we can't bait, can't put mineral out. In my area anyway. I know there's some spots in the UP I believe you can still bait, but it's kind of hard to find a way to get that inventory, at least to find out where, what deer you have. And with my 1 acre piece, that the way that we hinge cut it, and the way that the timber and it thickened up and everything, the way that it just like so happened, right smack dab in the middle of it is like the biggest epicenter of deer, concentrated deer, a lot. So, when I was doing this and I was getting some advice from some people about stay the heck out of there, stay out. So what I did 2 years ago is I put a camera randomly just on this. It's the only opening in this whole, hinge cut. And I'm like, my whole focus was to leave this camera here all year. And it kind of, for me, I'm gone October, usually the 25th till Thanksgiving. Like, I'm not here during the rut. If I'm here during the rut, we've done really good other places and we got to come home. So I'm always filming or producing stuff like that. So I knew I was going to be gone. So I freshened the batteries up, and I'm like, this, I'm going to figure out what this piece is with nothing bothering it at all. And that first card pull, 2 years ago when I got back, I learned more in that first card pull than I've ever learned probably in one season about deer and how they use this area. Now, with that being said, it's 1 acre and it's hard as shit to hunt. Because when I enter it, I have to enter it through wide open fields. And same this year, it's beans around the whole thing. And it's just like a triangle piece in the middle of nowhere. So it's hard to enter it. But I put my cell cam right in the middle of it, right on the same tree it's always been on. And, that is more or less for me to know if there's deer in there when I'm going in to hunt it. That's my game plan there. And I've cut strategic trails through the hinge cut that these deer only use those trails. Like, I know they are seriously down to mud. It's unbelievable. But the thing is you don't see a lot of deer. Like, my cell cam's been out for just over a week now, and I've maybe got 25 pictures on it in a week, maybe. And it's all been probably 1 or 2 does. It will start ramping up, but I did find out, like, daylight, if you can hunt this spot the right way and get in and not spook anything, I'm telling you, you could kill a Pope and Young or have an opportunity at one every year. But it's just so fidgety, so fine. So I'm. It's interesting to hear you talk about those cameras because I want to go check that camera, all the time. And I have to force myself to not. And I guess that leads to my next question is about, glow and non-glow cameras. Now, the cell cam I use is a SpyPoint MicroLink. I don't know if you are familiar with those at all.
Yep.
I love it. It's, for the price, it works great. But I almost feel like it scares some deer. Have you had that instance at all?
Yeah, so certain cameras, different flash types. It's I would say that's like one of the great trail camera debates. There's really three flash types. So you got a white flash, a red flash, and a black flash. White flash is either LED or old school like strobe light. Red flash is going to be your infrared traditional sense where you can see the red faint glow. And then your black flash is going to be, there's a lot of marketing terms, I'll say, that are used, but they range from being faintly visible a few feet away to not being visible by the human eye. And there's always some wiggle room in there because some people can biologically actually see those wavelengths a little bit more than some other people can. And so you and I might look at the same trail camera, say if it was like pitch black out, you might see the glow a little bit, I might not. So, there's some nuances in there. But what I've learned over time is that, deer, especially mature bucks, they all have dispositions. Some are more tolerant of trail cameras, whether it's the illumination or just the fact that this box is on a tree. Some deer have more tolerance for it than others do. And so there's probably not going to be an answer that answers them all. But, the majority of my cameras are black flash. I think it's just one of those ones where, from a point of risk aversion, I'm going to do whatever I can to try to minimize the likelihood that a buck's going to be concerned with a camera, whether it's the flash or the physical camera.
Yep.
And black flash is just the one way I prefer to, avoid adding any extra risk into the equation, if you will.
Gotcha. Okay. Now, when you're checking your cameras or even putting them out or even fiddling with your cameras all, do you use rubber gloves? Do you do you not care? Or, how do you treat your cameras when you're out there checking?
Yeah. So I would say in terms of setting cameras, one of the things that I always try to avoid is using the straps. Obviously they're convenient. They come with cameras. But if you really think about it, when you're handling a camera, those cameras have hard-shelled plastic. They're not going to be super absorbent of, scent residue, if you will. But those straps, they're nylon, synthetic materials. They can absorb and kind of hold some of that scent. So I generally try to avoid using straps. And then also from a security and getting your camera stolen perspective, straps get more cameras stolen than the cameras themselves, because you can see a strap 360 degrees around a tree, right? So I'll use screw-in mounts. If I'm not on public property, I'll use screw-in mounts. And those are a lot more adjustable. You can high mount them real easy. You can set them in a way that visibly doesn't spook the bucks, but then also at the same point in time reduces the scent you leave behind, because you don't have your sweating hands and palms all over those straps too.
For sure. Yep, that totally makes sense. And I use a little bit of both. I've got some straps and I've got some, screw-in mounts as well. I love the versatility of the screw-in mounts. Like you said, you can adjust them however you want. They really are versatile. They're a lot more expensive than straps,
Yeah.
To get some screw-ins, but I definitely agree with that. When you're setting cameras, are you doing a certain height, or are you like waist high, chest high? Like what is do you have a height restriction?
Yeah, so the hard part about this, is that every trail camera has its sweet spot where it performs best, right? So every trail camera has sensing zones. And how a picture is basically triggered is something moves between those zones that is able to be detected by that camera, which tells it to take a picture, right? And those properties or performance characteristics can change based on how high or low you mount the camera, or whether you aim the camera toward the horizon. So you really have to learn the cameras that you own, how well they perform. Say if you've got them mounted between 3 and 4 feet high, aim toward the horizon, sort of level set, versus, hey, I'm going to mount it 8 or 9 or 15 feet in the air and angle it down. You need to actually understand what the limitations are of the camera in those scenarios, because if you don't, that's where you get into that risk where you mentioned earlier, where cameras can frustrate people and kind of like, do more harm than good. If you don't understand how that camera performs in the way you're mounting it, you're probably going to miss out on an opportunity that you might otherwise have been alerted to.
Okay, that makes sense. That because I have a camera on a tree. It's like basically I mounted it right underneath my tree stand, a couple feet underneath of it, but it's on a field edge, and it's where all the deer enter the field, or come into the field and exit the field. And I did not want deer to see it, and I figured it was one of those things like I could always check it when I'm climbing my tree. I can just grab the card. Well, I did not. I mean, I felt like when I was aiming it, I felt like it was like, oh, that's perfect, but it was it was only getting deer that were coming 5 feet away. It wouldn't get the deer that are, 20, 25, 30 feet out in the field, I was hoping. And I think it was because it was too high, and the angle I had it at, it was just not conducive. So whenever a deer was close and there was deer behind it, I could get that. But looking back at it now, I'd probably just put it right on the ground, like on a post or on a tree or something like that, and just face it right out in the bean field. But you live and you learn, I guess.
Yeah, high mounting cameras is a very popular tactic now, especially, on public lands where people are worried about theft, or maybe alerting other hunters that there's somebody kind of scouting in that general space. They don't want to give away, maybe a honey hole or something like that. And that's one of the riskier propositions, because, some cameras have the sensing zone basically like a rectangle in the middle third of that particular picture, if you will, right? So if you imagine you set a camera and imagine a rectangle dead center of that picture, that's the sensing zone. So if something is set, if that camera's set at 3 or 4 feet and it walks across, it's going to trigger, whether it's 10 yards out or 30 yards out, it's going to trigger because it's walking into that sensing zone. But if you take that camera now and you move it up 10 feet and you aim it down, well, guess what? There's all those corners in the viewpoint of that picture are not going to have any triggers, because the deer's not necessarily going to walk into the sensing zone.
I see what you're saying. Yep.
Yeah. And so you run into situations where oftentimes you'll hear people say like, hey, I had a camera set out and I was in a stand and I watched this deer walk right by it, and I ran and grabbed the SD card and there was no pictures on it. This camera's horrible. And it wasn't the camera, it was the user, user error.
Yep.
So it's, that's where, people get a camera. The first thing they want to do is throw batteries, throw an SD card in, and go out to the woods and go set it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the right way to do it is, depending upon how you plan to use it, get that camera set up and do a walk test. Understand, how that camera triggers, where it triggers, where the performance is best. And if you do that, when you do actually go to set it in the woods, you're not going to screw it up.
Yep, definitely. If you had, I'm going to put you on the spot here. If you had one thing to tell listeners and trail cam users, how do I want to word this? If you had one thing to tell them to keep in mind maybe about, using cameras and, for whitetails and all that, what would you tell them?
The one tip. That's a really good question. I would say that's probably a hard question to answer.
I figured.
That's good. That's a good stump question. I would say, in my opinion, understand that trail cameras are a tool and not the only tool, if that makes sense.
Yep. Yeah.
Right. So I know we had talked a little bit about, not having a particular buck on a camera and getting frustrated. Just because you're not seeing that deer on that camera doesn't mean that deer is not using their property. Right. And it is a tool. So I guess my tip would be it's one of many tools that you should use as a hunter to help make you better. But if you use the tool right, it can really help you be more successful as a hunter.
Mm-hmm.
And quite honestly too, like, do the math, right? So, like, imagine, for anybody listening to this, imagine the most hardcore mature whitetail hunter and think about the time they put in scouting and glassing and doing everything they do to be successful. The amount of time they spend on whitetails is going to be a fraction of the amount of time that a trail camera spends on whitetails in the woods.
Right.
That trail camera's out there 24 hours a day.
Yep. Yeah, that makes total sense, man. When do you start getting your cameras out in the summer?
So I generally, for whitetails, I'll start putting them out usually around Memorial Day weekend to around kind of now, this time of the year, at least up here in New York. Couple reasons. Our turkey season ends in May. And for whatever reason, high pressure state, I'm sure you're probably used to it too, but turkey season tends to get a lot of trespassers. And so I've actually had more cameras stolen during shed hunting season and turkey season than I do in summer in actual deer hunting season.
Yep.
So I generally don't run a lot of cameras during that time frame because I almost always end up having trespasser issues at some point.
Gotcha.
So I'll put them out this time of the year. For my regular cameras, I do it kind of purposeful, because what I'll do is I'll put them out now, I'll set them up, and then I'll come back and visit them on July 4th weekend.
Okay.
And basically what I'll do then is, number one, inventory, see what's out there. But number two, make sure they're working right.
Yep.
Make sure there's no weeds blowing in front of them, right? And then from that check in July, I generally won't check them again until sometime in mid to late August. So I'll go 6 to 8 weeks without checking those trail cameras because I don't want to overcheck them. And quite frankly, there's not a lot of value in checking that camera every 2 weeks during July.
Yep, definitely. I agree. 100%. That's kind of what I try to do. I didn't in the past. I'm always like I said, I want to get out there and look at them. But now, and it helps. I've got a daughter, she'll be 3 in August. That takes up a lot of my time, now. And I'm thinking about taking up basket weaving just to, to fill my time up even more, So it's the trail cams don't weigh on my mind as much as they used to. So I try to let them marinate a little bit longer. But I'll tell you what, that first pull, when you get the first good buck on camera, it's like, oh no, here we go. Now I need to check this in 2 weeks, make sure he's back.
Yeah. I've learned, if you've been, hunting whitetails long enough, especially if you've got a velvet monster that's showing up on your soybean field every night and you're getting picture after picture, you get really excited, until you start to realize that there's a big coin flip coming in a few weeks, when they shift ranges, when the velvet comes off, there's a chance that buck might move, a mile or 2 miles away off your property that you don't have access to. And so, what I've learned, and, it's something that happens over time, because I totally get it. You get a good buck on camera, you want to get more pictures of that buck because that inspires confidence. But this is where patience and kind of perseverance helps out a little bit, because the less pressure you put on it, the more you're going to learn, because you're going to see the deer in their normal natural patterns. And if you check your cameras right and you use your cell cameras right, you might put yourself in a position where opening day you've got a high odds opportunity to go after one of your target bucks.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. Well,
would say real quick too, just to mention, I know you had talked about, the mineral use and not being able to do that in some states. There is a little bit of an aggressive tactic I will use that has paid off for me, in terms of being able to understand and learn what bucks are huntable. And in New York, since you can't use mineral licks or corn, apple trees have been one thing that will make me become really aggressive about trying to get a camera in that general vicinity, especially if it's a bearing apple tree in an area that I know deer are going to feel safe being on their feet in daylight.
Yep.
And you will, and we're covered in ag. Like, we're small broken woodlots, right? Like, if you've got a woodlot that's more than 40 acres, you're hunting at one of the biggest woodlots in the area, probably.
Yeah.
So it's heavy ag, heavy beans, heavy corn, heavy alfalfa, brassica cover plots. So in that space, there's a lot of wild apple trees too that exist in this area, and a lot of them are in those, safe spaces that deer will be comfortable being on their feet on in daylight. And, the apples here in New York, for the most part, are going to be end of August to early to mid-October timeframe. And if I know that I've got an apple tree that's going to be a really strong bearing apple tree and it's in a good spot, I will set a camera right on that apple tree or facing it, and you will be amazed at how strong of an attractant that apple tree actually is for deer.
Yeah. That is one thing, definitely, if you can find one around here. I mean, we do have apple trees, but a lot of them are overgrown on the farms that I hunt. But one good thing that's worked for me is any source of water. If you can find a water hole, a little creek, something that keeps water most of the summer, all summer, deer are just... I've always overlooked water. And now I set up a camera one summer. I'm like, you know what? Just going to see what happens. Best camera I had all summer. Deer constantly. And you get some pretty cool pictures too.
Yeah. And, what's interesting, I learned with water, water is often thought of as being a good area or a good spot to hunt around or over during early season when it's hot. But I've actually found water sources to be really popular with mature bucks during the rut, right? So a lot of times, deer are chasing and bucks are spending a lot of energy and they get thirsty. And, what I've found is that, using cameras over water holes or water sources, you actually get quite a few mature bucks in daylight visiting those water holes, getting a drink. And it's funny too, you mentioned it, because like in these frames, in these pictures, these deer, you can visibly tell they're panting, because they're rutting and they're running around, and these deer are overheating and they just run in there, get a drink of water, and then they're off again. And so water sources are a really good option too for, both early season and during the rut itself.
Yep, for sure. Well, I got one more question for you before we wrap this up. What is your favorite trail cam?
So I would say if I had to pick one camera that I think right now represents probably the best tool, it would probably be the Spartan Ghost. It's a cell camera. It is not cheap. It's, over $400 MSRP, whatever the term they use with it. But it's a reliable, proven cell platform that you can pretty much, bank on to perform with for you. It gets really good battery life. It can send HD videos, to your cell phone. The image quality, which, cell cameras, are starting to have some of the characteristics of regular trail cameras in terms of manufacturers are going one of two ways. They're either racing to the bottom for a cost, or they're going up market into the most expensive, most feature-rich performance capability. There's not a lot of cell cameras in the middle, right? In that like $200, $250 range. They tend to be somewhere between $100 and $150 or $300 and plus. And the Spartan is on the higher end of it, but It's reliable. It has a lot of features that, in my opinion, if you're going to own one cell camera, that's the one you own. I would say if you're going to invest money and you want to get a lot of cell cameras, the Cuddy-Back Cuddy-Link network is probably one of the best and most cost-effective ways to do it, and you still get really good performance as well. You can basically have one cell plan and have, I think it's up to 20 some cameras now put on a mesh network that sends all of their pictures to one cell camera that in turn sends to you.
Yep.
So it's kind of, it's depending upon whether you're going to have one camera or many. That's kind of my answer there. So it's a little bit of a cop out, but they're both good options.
Yeah, and I can personally vouch for the Cuddy-Link system. My deer camp, it consists of 11 guys here in Michigan, and we, have a kitty every year that we put money into. We have dues that we pay. Well, last year, it was going into last season, we're like, what do we want to spend some money on? And the Cuddy-Link system came out, and I was like, let's, try the Cuddy-Link system. So we got a set of 9 cameras. We keep the home base right in the yard of our cabin, and we disperse them in areas that typically, right now, we put them in areas for inventory, but we just put them out a week ago, and that thing is so nice. You go right up to the home base, pull the card, put it in your computer, and it's got all the cameras folded out by number. You can see every picture on each camera, and as long as you can find good service from camera to camera, because it daisy chains them, it's so helpful. It is really nice. And I run a mixed bag of things, honestly. My dad and I bought a couple of Reconixes way back when, spent so much money on them. He bought one. I'm like, okay, I'll buy one. So have a couple of Reconixes, and then I run some Browning trail cams, a Spy Point micro link. What else do I have? I got a couple. I have a, what's that brand called? I can't remember. There's like 2 other brands, but honestly, I'm going for like quantity over quality. I was always a guy that I want more cameras and I just want to get pictures. But I did go down like the wild game route for a while, and they'd only last a year. So I'm like, okay, I'm done with that. And then I found like Browning has a couple cameras for the bang for the buck. They are, great battery life, take good enough pictures, and, I can get a few of them. So there's a lot of good cameras out there though, man. Exodus, I've never used one, but everything I hear for Exodus is good. Pound for pound, I think the best camera out there is a Reconix. Hands down, if you can afford them, in my opinion, are the best camera out there.
Yeah, the Browning makes a really, really good camera, like dollar for dollar, trying to find that balance between, like you said, the quantity versus the quality kind of approach there. For most consumers, the Browning is probably going to be the best option for a regular trail camera. They do have a cell camera out. In fact, the buck that I shot this year was shot because I was using a Browning cell camera. And in fact, Browning, I'm unaware of any buck that was killed off of a cell camera earlier than the one I killed with it, because I was able to get one of the earliest Browning cell cameras that hit the market and was able to get it out right away. So I had a little bit of a head start. But Browning makes really, really good trail cameras. So dollar for dollar, you can buy 2, 3, sometimes 4 Brownings for the price of, a Reconix. And Reconix is no slouch. It's their manufacturing process, their quality control, the fact that they actually repair their cameras when consumers have a problem with them instead of just replacing them. They are kind of the litmus test for quality, but they're also very, very expensive, and people have a problem slapping $500 to a tree.
For sure.
So Browning is a really good option. In the cell space, their cameras have only been out since about November. So I think as time goes on and they get more experience in that arena of trail cams, they're going to continue to be a good company to go after and use for most people.
Very cool, man. Well, I wanna be conscious of your time here too, and I want to thank you for coming on and doing this. Thank you for getting a hold of me. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I don't think it's gonna stop here. I think we should get together again and stay in touch and maybe do another podcast here. Coming into season, maybe you kill another big deer because of a camera this year.
Hey, I'd love to. Hopefully that happens. We're in a high pressure state, so it's for us, you don't see a lot of 180s running around. We're not the Midwest, but we do have. You can realistically go after some 120s and 130s every year. Usually, you find one or two of them to go after, and trail cams have definitely helped us up our game over the past couple of years. And so if you need any help or have any questions, or if anybody has any questions, feel free to send them my way, and I'll be more than happy to give any advice I can.
Yeah, if anybody wanted to do that, where would they find you and send their questions to?
Yeah, so my trail camera retail business, I have a very basic website. In fact, I would say probably 99% of my business is actually word of mouth, which I prefer because then I don't have to spend a ton of time advertising. But the website address is literally pursuitoutdoors.com. I've had that web address for like 20 years from when I was back in college. I got a wild idea. I should buy this website address, and, didn't know 20 years from now I was going to start a trail camera company with it.
That's awesome. Are you on social media as well?
Yeah, so I have Facebook. So generally, Facebook is the most common medium that I use for the company. It's basically just it's Pursuit Outdoors Trail Cameras is the address on Facebook for it.
Awesome, man. Well, thank you very much. Hopefully, your experience on this podcast was a pleasant one. So I can't thank you enough.
Awesome, man. I appreciate it.
System overload on this podcast. I'll tell you, there's a lot of information on this, and I'm going to have to go back and listen to it. But Brad gave a lot of good insight on cameras. I mean, not only, how to use cameras effectively, but, explaining the glows of cameras and what they show, the white, the red, the black. So it's pretty cool, and it kind of makes you step back and think about your cameras and how to use them a little differently as well. So that was pretty cool. Thank you to Brad for coming on and doing this. Really appreciate that. And I'm just going to remind you guys again, please go to iTunes, leave a 5-star rating, and leave a review. Thank you very much. And also, I don't want to forget, yesterday was my dad's birthday, so if anybody knows him and sees him, tell him happy belated birthday. So thank you, everybody, and we'll see you back here next week on the Fall Podcast.